Alright, hit the button. Didn't hear a beep though. What the hell? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Don't have to hear something. Yeah, I guess I don't have to. Does make you wonder though. Strange. Anyway, probably forgot something. A lens cover. Oh, there it is. Alright, anyway, yeah. Video. Alright, to be serious. Dawkins. Evolution. This is a primary subject for her. And this word, altruism. And the book, The Selfish Gene. And somehow this argument that Dawkins has retracted something or... No. He's retracted people's problem with the word selfish and their inability to understand that he wasn't even saying the genes themselves are selfish and that they don't have a capacity to do something in a overt... They don't have a capacity to do something. That's a good word right there. You could stop right there. They don't do anything. They are part of a process. The process of evolution, which is the process of selection. And his argument is what's being selected is genes. You have genes in your body right now that are millions and millions of years old, maybe even billions. Little sequences of code that has survived, literally billions of years in a competition. And the competition takes place out here in this arena. But what is being selected are pieces of code. All right, little sequences of molecular junk. And so obviously the little sequences of themselves aren't fighting with each other. They don't have like little swords and they aren't like fighting with each other and saying, I'm going to own you, you fucker. No, the game of real evolution, 99% of the evolution, takes place out here in the arena where it's decided whether my genes will replicate or that person's genes or that tree's genes or that AIDS virus or whatever the thing is. Its genes survive and something else's genes do not. And that's the competition. Now the other part that's a tiny influence on the competition is the inheritance of your epigenetic code, which is the hardware that goes along with the DNA in the transfer. So when your DNA is copied, you're not only given a copy of the DNA, you're given a copy is transferred of the copying mechanism. Now, literally speaking, I don't think that takes place from, it is an asexual process. I think that's an egg function. So the egg hardware is the hardware that's transferred, the mother's hardware is the hardware transferred, not the male's hardware, epigenetically. But that's a side issue, it doesn't really matter. As I'm pointing out, it's a minor part of evolution because it doesn't have much, it's not a blueprint function. So whatever it does, it has to do it, how to put this, it's a different kind of evolution, and it's an evolution that functions much slower. There's less possibility for rapid change, broad change that can take place through through changing the blueprint. Rewriting the blueprint's a lot easier than rewriting or reconfiguring the functional part, because the functional part has to work where you can make slight modifications to the genetic material and the thing can still function. It'll just have different attributes. I guess that's a kind of a good way to put it. There's just more risk of breaking the copying machine than there is breaking the thing being copied, if you get my drift. You can make alterations to the thing being copied, the copy of the copy machine, the blueprint of the copy machine. You can make alterations to that without being as dramatic as alterations to the copier itself. If you change the copying machinery, then you're likely to mess up things in too dramatic a way. If you create too many errors, you'll flood the thing with errors, because the copying machine is doing something that has redundancies in terms of it has to do it over and over and over. It can't just not work. It's got to work as a copier, not as a not copier. If it is a not copier, if it's a don't copy it correctly, or in all the iterations, all the times it has to work reliably, it won't be working reliably. And so therefore it'll cause too dramatic a change and break the organism entirely. Alright, well, that's way too technical for where I wanted to go with this video. So just responding to the accusation that she intended to imply that by literalist she was talking to fundamentalists, Christians or something, creationists or some kind of nonsense like that. In the context of Piro's video, I call that bullshit. I call bullshit on that excuse, that interpretation of the word literalist. Piro wasn't talking to creationists. He wasn't talking to religious fanatics. He was talking to general philosophers, and so that's just bullshit. Sorry. And to think that everybody's supposed to understand even the word fundamentalist is a little bit of a cheat to assume religious fundamentalist, but it's about 10,000 times more reasonable to associate the word fundamentalism with religion than literalist with religion. Especially in a conversation about the usefulness of metaphor in conveying understanding as being the context of a bunch of conversation and a bunch of videos currently. So anyway, I'm just saying, call bullshit, people, come on. She used the word literalist as an insult, and she used it to describe not religious fundamentalism, but any kind of belief system that probably uses as its foundation some kind of Dawkins-esque logic. Again, she keeps using Dawkins as if he's a weapon in her defense. And I'm going to argue that if you take most of Dawkins' serious conversations seriously, there's no way you're going to find him pleasing to the poetic, phantasmagorical, there's all kinds of hopeful bullshit in here. No, there isn't. It's a pretty bleak reality he's described. And, he personally endeavors to persevere. But when he's talking about genetics, he doesn't provide much room for tap dancing around the truth of it, which is it's a mechanism. It doesn't have high ambitions. It has low ambitions. The ambition is to just create a bloodbath and award the future to whoever wins, whatever wins. So anyway, I want to talk about this altruism word some more, because it's always annoyed the hell out of me. It's not even, I don't think, a real concept. In so many ways, it's just so hard to really find it. Even in the best of our actions, the subjective bigotries are still there. The hungers that attach us to things and make us do something in their benefit are not, I don't think, fairly described as altruistic. If you're going to say there's this concept of doing something merely because it's the right thing to do, not because of any subjective interest not through any subjective desire mechanism like love or attachment, personal emotional attachment, just some pure sense that it's put before you. You can save a random 3 people from having a broken leg if you endure the broken leg. That would be altruism, to say, okay, break my leg, and it's just 3 random humans that are spared a broken leg. That would be, and we are capable of that, so that's possible, but it's not the general functionality. Generally speaking, when they say altruism, they're including a bunch of behaviors that are not altruistic. They are nationalistic, nepotistic. Well, let's just do with nepotism. I mean, that's a huge function in human society, is this idea that my kids are better than somebody else's kids. It's just it's an idiotic notion. You can't defend it on any level whatsoever. It's completely an emotional response. It has no integrity as a way of acquiring a value. People should logically be able to step way over that one and say, okay, I have an emotional bias. I can accept my bias, but I won't act on my bias. But of course they don't, and that's why we have greed societies that idolize nonsense like inheritance, just that nonsense. Judge a man based on the, judge a man based on the quality of the vagina it fell out of, not on the quality of his character. It's just insanely idiotic. If I went on the old campaign trail saying that, people would be able to, pretty easily say, I think there's something wrong with that logic. But yeah, we can see how these are the forces that motivate people. Nepotism, groupism, nationalism, racism. These are the isms that are dominant control functions. And people can't even, in principle, even qualify the truth of these blights on our progress, on our intelligence, and on the character of our civilization. I mean, it's one thing, again, I can go back to the vegetarian argument. It's one thing to be a meat eater and say, I like to eat meat. Fine. It's another thing if you're suggesting newborns should be trained to eat meat. If it's possible to create a different preference for them, an alternative preference, that somehow it's still preferable to eat meat. And that would be, teaching a child to smoke, is a lot different than smoking and conceding it's a pointless and stupid. All right, you may love your children more than the world's children, but admit what it is. Admit that it's just a subjective bias, a prejudice, based on nothing rational, completely emotive, completely biological. It's an owned bit of your psychology, almost like your sexual preference. It's a conditioned response you can't do much about, and concede that it's a corrosive, unproductive, unsocially healthy syndrome, period. Except that you are broken in the sense that you're blighted by that bigotry, and admit the rational truth that a child is a child, and they like everything else, should be judged and treated and cared for in proportion to what they have earned, to what their quality demands. And it shouldn't be about cuteness or genetic familiarity. And as soon as you're acting in the interest of children, based on that, it can't reasonably be called altruism. That is not altruism. A mother saving her child is not altruism. It's a personal incentive built out of a personal attachment. And there's nothing unselfish about it. Yeah. And I don't think Dawkins would disagree with anything I just said. So I wish he'd quit dropping his name, as if he buys into this theory of widespread true altruism. Yeah. So anyway, the whole function of evolution is a good subject just because it is the game. I mean, this is the biggest piece of fact. This is why we're not rocks. Okay? It's because our matter did this blueprint thing and did this evolution of a sequence of blueprint code. And the selection is on that code. And we're just the fodder for the replicating engine. And it has no purpose. It has no end game functionality. It's just a process, like a forest fire. And maybe it's pretty colors, and it's generating some energy, but there's nothing in it intrinsically. It's just a function of the universe when matter gets so configured that this is a possibility. It has no redeeming function to justify the abundant harm it has made possible. And such. Anyway, till the next time. And so forth. I thought I hit the... Alright, addendum, I guess, since I'm here. A little drizzly on the walk home. That's alright. I feel like drizzle. Anyway. Yeah, Dawkins. Yeah, I was a little disappointed. Sometimes we watch these things, to be serious, linked to this hour-long little Brilliant Minds thing, and okay, it was alright, but, I don't know. I always say, like, couldn't you do this in 10 minutes? I mean, really. And you find out things about people, and you're like, ew. Yeah, not like that. Dawkins, the basic idea for the Selfish Gene book is, mostly somebody else's research. Which, is sort of bullshit. Because everybody knows Dawkins' name. But, I mean, certainly Dawkins did his contribution. He put it into, pop culture jargon. He's supposed to be great with the prose and such. And so, yeah, I'm not taking that away from him. But the initial research was, a guy did all the insect math, the idea that, these insects in their evolution, most insects, the hive type, most individuals are not reproducing. So they're sort of constructed to be altruistic to the hive. And so it makes it even clearer how the genes are in control, that they really are being, completely owned, most of them, by the transformation of the queen's genetic code, and that they can be, which I think also insects demonstrate, is just how insidious the whole thing can get, and that you can, create whole life forms, whole colonies of living things that are completely subservient and have no, their own welfare is just completely disposable. They're it's almost like if sperm cells did evolve, if they did have their own genetic code and they became more complex organisms, it would be the same kind of idea where they're completely owned by the mission of the major biological organism, and they'd be completely slave mechanisms to that hierarchy. And that's pretty grotesque. But anyway, they don't feel, thankfully. Anyway, yeah. I think this, like I said, the context of this evolution thing is just so important to understand why we are, and why this rock stayed rock, and why we aren't rock. And, you know, that it is just this one replicating molecule 4 billion years ago, and it just keeps reproducing, and all it does is keep changing as it's reproducing. You know, the good errors are kept, but they're errors, you know, in a copy, and the good only means that it's you can almost say out in slaves, right? For insects, the more slaves you can create, the more, you know, the more your queen code can, you know, enslave. The you know, victory is yours. Your colony wins. Your code wins. And that's sort of where insects are heading. I mean, there may be a day where, if evolution was just to continue, well, I guess maybe not. Because there comes a resource limitation. I was just thinking it through and saying that colonies could number, well, they do now, number in the millions. Termite colonies in Africa are gigantic. But yeah, they could be even bigger. But I guess there is a point where there's a limitation to the size based on some sort of resource allocation equation or something, where there wouldn't be enough resources in the area, so they would have to fly away, so to speak. They have to start over somewhere new. That's essentially what they're doing. They just move the genetic code through a daughter of the queen to a new location. But the implication is there's a variation in that genetic code, a slight one, but there is. I guess that's the other thing to point out about the Dawkins thing, is just that the idea is that we all have some sort of common genetics, and that you know, maybe we're not 100%. We're 100% invested in our genetic code, but we're obviously 80 or 90, even 90% invested in other human genetic code. The genetic differences in the code between me and another human are very slight in percentages. Only a tiny fraction of the code has varied. And so yeah, there's kind of a you know, a substantial collective interest from the gene point of view, from the individual hunks of code point of view. God, I'm just so tired. Oh, gotta get healthier. Or younger. Maybe I'll do that. I will just get younger. I think I'll decide to do that. Mind over matter and such. I think that'll work. Low probability curve on this one. Anyway, that fucking donkey's donkeying. Anyway, but the bird's nice and such, so forth and whatnot. Oh, get to the house, Gary. Only a few more feet to go. Forget me nots. Oh. I will remember Thumbers. That's the cat. Especially days like this. Should be sitting right in this little cubby over here. But he ain't. He's dead.